your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us. A proposed wind turbine project in the area of Cardston County near the village of Hillspring is causing a lot of outrage among people who live in the area. Locals are concerned the project will have a great impact on wildlife and businesses. Angela Stewart caught up with some of the residents during a town hall meeting who expressed their frustration with the project.
It's being touted as a project that will provide social and economic benefits to the local community, but residents in Cardston County believe the Riplinger Wind Power Project will do more harm than good. A town hall meeting Thursday in the village of Hillspring saw well over a dozen residents expressing their concerns about the project, saying it will have a great impact on the community.
The vast majority of residents of this area seem to be against this, and it's only a few landowners who have signed on. There may be places for windmills, this is not it.
Covering about 14,000 acres of land just southeast of Pincher Creek, up to 50 turbines are expected to be put in, generating about 300 megawatts of power. TransAlta, the company behind the project, say early environmental studies were conducted in the area. But despite this, Angela Tabak and many others believe it will affect the habitat.
We observe all the time the migratory birds coming through here, pelicans, eagles, bats. So we're really concerned about the effect that it's going to have on the environment, including other wildlife. We have a lot of wildlife coming through this corridor out of Waterton.
And Kristen Primrose, who owns a cut flower farm, says she doesn't want to see the landscape disrupted, as this will hurt her business.
I bring in close to 1,000 people per month during tourist season. So if I can't offer that, that greatly impacts the tourist season within our local area. Brides aren't going to want to get married with, massive turbines blocking all the pretty mountains and all the landscape and all that.
With many questions still lingering, the locals say they hope to have consultations with TransAlta, hoping to come to some sort of agreement. An approval from the Alberta Utilities Commission must be given before TransAlta can proceed with the proposed project. If approved, the electricity company expects construction to begin in 2023 and will be fully operational by 2025. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
An official with TransAlta says they are listening to the concerns of residents, but studies were done in the area beforehand to see if the area would be negatively impacted.
We heard a lot of those concerns when we reached out to the community. And part of what we do when we develop a project is we go out there and we do all our studies. We send out the biologists, they collect information about the wetlands, the birds in the area, the wildlife in the area, and then we build that into how we design the project so that we can mitigate the impacts. And so that's what we did. And a lot of that feedback that we got from those studies went into how we laid out our turbines so that there was minimal impact to the wildlife in the area.
The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees held a rally recently in Lethbridge at the Chancellor Court building. Members were protesting cuts and layoffs impacting Good Samaritan Society workers. Darren Graham, the Vice President of AUPE for the Southern Region, explained what is currently happening in negotiations with the Good Sam Society.
We've put forward monetary proposals. They haven't put anything on the table, so we haven't even been able to bargain. But we're looking for what other long-term care agreements have been receiving, right? 6 years without a pay raise with this inflationary times for people that are very close to the poverty line to start with. Like I said, there's some salaries in his collective agreement that are below minimum wage, and that's just not right, especially in these times when we're seeing the increased inflation. Being called the Good Samaritan Society, they're not being very good Samaritans to their own workers.
Officials from the Good Samaritan Society declined an interview with Bridge City News, but they did send us a statement. It reads, "We have had no layoffs in Lethbridge and there are no such plans. Alberta Health Services has reduced funding for 77 beds at the Good Samaritan Southgate Care Center in Edmonton. As a result, we will be reducing staffing in clinical and non-clinical roles to align with the new funding at that site. There are no planned reductions at other GSS sites. We are in active bargaining with the union." Coming up, will Alberta host the Commonwealth Games again? A debate is unfolding. More details after the break. Alberta's two largest cities are exploring the feasibility of submitting a joint bid to host the 2030 Commonwealth Games. The mayors of both Calgary and Edmonton are joining Alberta's Culture Minister Jason Lewin to look into the bidding process. The Games are held every 4 years with competitors representing 72 nations and territories. The potential cost for a joint Calgary-Edmonton bid has yet to be determined, but some groups say they're concerned about an Alberta bid to host the Games. The Alberta Institute says hosting such games has cost upwards of $1 billion in the past, and the benefits wouldn't be worth the cost or risk to taxpayers. The Canadian Taxpayer Federation is calling for a referendum to give taxpayers a say in a bid decision, citing affordability struggles driven by high inflation. The Alberta government says it's offering more support for those who have been impacted by the devastating earthquakes that hit both Turkey and Syria. Officials say they will match donations made by Albertans and provincial organizations to the Canadian Red Cross up to a total of $1 million. Funding will go towards humanitarian aid helping families to rebuild. The Alberta government says more than 600 affordable housing units will be coming, which will be targeting Albertans in need. Around $54 million will be allocated towards supporting 17 projects in 9 communities in the province. Much of the money will be going to initiatives in both Calgary and Edmonton, but there is also funding for our rural regions.
Part of our strategy is to make sure that we're building out affordable housing, senior lodges in some of our more rural and remote communities as well, and to make sure that people can live in the community that they raised their families in, that they built their lives in. We think that's critical for our seniors and provide that dignity. So we are. I've been traveling the province, meeting with a number of different municipalities. There are a number of projects in our more rural and remote communities as well that we will be funding as we go forward.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says more funding will go toward improving access to mental health supports for our province's youth. Smith says if passed, Budget 2023 would invest $92 million over 3 years to provide mental health supports for our children. Smith says every young person in Alberta deserves access to supports, including treatment to help aid in addictions recovery.
We are moving closer to this goal with the introduction of Budget 2023. This year's provincial budget includes record investments for the newly established Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction, more than $275 million in funding each year, which is an increase of almost 40% from last year and a 200% increase from what we inherited from the NDP before us. This record-breaking investment will be used to focus on key priorities, including helping children and youth improve their mental health, growing Indigenous partnerships, further increasing access to treatment and recovery supports.
The Alberta government announced $4.4 million for a gang suppression and firearms investigation unit to help tackle gang and illegal gun violence in the province. It came a day after the government introduced legislation aimed at bulking up on its ongoing firearms feud with Ottawa. Alberta's Public Safety Minister, Mike Ellis, said the new legislation would give Alberta the tools it needs to deal with what it calls escalating attacks by the federal government on law-abiding Alberta gun owners. Government officials and Alert say the funding is vital in cracking down on crime.
Gun violence goes hand in hand with organized crime and gang activity. There is always a danger to innocent bystanders when our public spaces are disrupted by violence. I know this, and Calgarians know this.
Alert teams have made nearly 12,000 arrests, seized almost $1 billion worth of drugs, and taken nearly 2,000 firearms off the streets in Alberta.
Alberta NDP energy critic Kathleen Ganley is demanding that the UCP not give out $20 billion taxpayer dollars to friends of Premier Danielle Smith. Ganley is making reference to funding that the energy sector could receive to clean up old abandoned wells, something Ganley says should be paid for by the oil and gas companies and not Alberta taxpayers.
Danielle Smith herself lobbied for this royalty giveaway before she became Premier. She advocated for it during the UCP leadership contest. She swapped out a UCP energy minister who opposed it for a vocal proponent, and continues to list it as a key strategy in her budget released last week.
Coming up next, the UCP and NDP are tying for first place, but only one can win the race. We have more on a recent poll after the break.
They're tied in Calgary. They're sort of neck and neck in Calgary across the whole province. NDP's up in Edmonton and the UCP are very much up in rural Alberta. Now, that 22% undecided seems to have come in significant portion from people who voted UCP in 2019 and are now unsure who they're going to vote for.
With the Alberta provincial election coming up May 29th, a recent poll has the UCP and NDP in a virtual tie in the province. There is also a large percent of Albertans who are undecided. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson chats with Hal Roberts about where each party is receiving the bulk of their support. He also discusses the city of Grande Prairie voting for their own police force. Take a look.
Now, one of the stories we featured on Bridge City News earlier this week was how Grande Prairie is moving towards its own municipal police force and no longer using the RCMP. Now, the transition will take around 5 years and cost millions of dollars.
That's right. So it should be sort of 2027-ish by the time the force is sort of fully transitioned. You know, there's tons of logistics that go into something like this, you know, from buying police cars to body armor and pepper spray and hiring officers, and you need an HR department. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that needs to go into this sort of transition. But, you know, from a political perspective, I think the interesting thing is that the budget set out about $10 million to help Grande Prairie with this transition. And when you look at, you know, obviously we've talked before about the possibility of having an Alberta Provincial Police Service and what that might look like, what that might cost, those sorts of things. And Danielle Smith has said she's in favor of that. But it does appear to be on the back burner a little bit right now. You know, there hasn't been much development on that front in the last few months. I don't know if they're waiting until after the election. But the other thing to consider is whether or not, you know, there are some places that might just do this on their own, and that'll be sort of a way in to larger reform of the RCMP. Of course, there's not that many large municipalities left to get their own police service. You know, I think Red Deer maybe still has the RCMP, Fort McMurray. Those might be the only two big ones off the top of my head. So anyways, it's really interesting, I think, in the context of the spending set aside to assist it, this political goal that has been a part of the UCP program for a couple of years of replacing the RCMP, and you know, in the much broader context, of course, other municipalities have done this as well. Surrey being one in BC in the last couple of years. So it's actually, you know, it's a bit of a microcosm, I think, of some of the much larger issues happening with the RCMP and policing in general.
And you know what? I think this is the first time since 1956 that a municipality has gone away from the RCMP and brought in their own municipal police force.
I was just going to jump in and say, and I have no idea which police force that was in 1956. I mean, it was probably Lethbridge or Medicine Hat, but I have no idea. And I'm curious about that, actually.
You know, it's kind of cool in the archives here at the Galt Museum in Lethbridge. We looked at some of the Alberta Provincial Police Force that we had a long time ago, and they're actually machine guns on motorbikes with the guys in the sidecar. I'm like, wow, that was hardcore, this Alberta Provincial Police Force way back when. Tyler, the election, as we talked about, is coming up at the end of May. Now, a recent poll says the UCP and the NDP are essentially tied, but there are 22% who are undecided. So I guess both parties have to really work hard to shore up support over the next 10 to 12 weeks or so.
Yeah, really interesting situation. So you've got about 35% supporting both. And the NDP have a lead in Edmonton. The UCP have a lead in Calgary. The UCP has, or no, sorry, they're tied in Calgary. They're sort of neck and neck in Calgary across the whole province. NDP's up in Edmonton and the UCP are very much up in rural Alberta. Now, that 22% undecided seems to have come in significant portion from people who voted UCP in 2019 and are now unsure who they're going to vote for. So that's a really, really interesting situation, because you have this group of people who, were maybe the UCP voters in 2015 and the Justin Trudeau voters in 2015 kind of thing. So you have to wonder where those people are going to go, and you have to wonder what the parties are going to try and do to attract these voters. For Danielle Smith, for example, that puts her in an interesting position because she has a party base that she needs to keep happy. But she also needs to attract these sort of suburban Calgary voters, these suburban Lethbridge voters, these suburban Edmonton voters, in a way that is going to be maybe a little bit of a challenge to do when put up against some of the priorities of the party faithful in places like Grand Prairie, for example. So it's a really, really interesting political dynamic, and you have to wonder what each party's looking at and thinking, oh my goodness, how do I swing these people?
Tyler, let me ask you something. If the UCP ends up winning this next election, let's say it's a majority, do you potentially see that maybe Rachel Notley would step aside as leader? Maybe somebody like Shannon Phillips, our Lethbridge West MLA, would pursue the leadership?
I think it's a possibility. It has been tough to say the last couple of years, I think, who sort of the heir apparent might be for Rachel Notley. She's just had a grip on that party for so long. It's almost hard to imagine the party without her, But I think it's a possibility. It's tough to lead a party through two losses after being the government in power.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, a former Alberta paramedic talks about her own medical emergency. Welcome back. The subject of COVID-19 vaccine injuries has been a controversial one. Claims of vaccine injuries are often dismissed if there were pre-existing conditions prior to receiving a dose. Charissa Clam, a former healthcare worker and paramedic, says after receiving her second jab, she endured a long battle due to a confirmed vaccine injury. She now stresses the importance of doing your own independent research before allowing foreign substances into your body. She tells BCN's Naveen Day in this next interview she doesn't want others to go through what she has experienced.
Prior to getting your first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, was there anything known or unknown at the time that could have indicated that you could have an adverse reaction?
No, there really wasn't. My pre-existing injury going into this was a lumbar L4, L5 annular tear with a disc compression causing the sciatica into my feet. Nothing about blood work or anything health related at that time. I was in good condition deemed by my doctor going into the vaccine.
Now, you say you received 2 doses of an mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, the first being Moderna, the second Pfizer. And then something happened after your second shot. Tell us what happened.
Well, about 4 days later, actually immediately after, I started to not feel good, but I did just, hear from the nurses that it could take, 3 to 4 days or 2 to 3 days for the arm swelling to go down and for your symptoms to go away. And after that time, it didn't go away. I started getting really sick, and it was to the point I was even having trouble breathing. I was just very short of breath. So what I did do is I went to emergency at that time here at the Chinook Regional, and nothing was known at that time, that it was a vaccine injury. It was just a matter of them treating, my symptoms. I was having chest pain, shortness of breath, extreme fatigue, and that almost started immediately. That started the 14-month battle was just the beginning.
So you said that you had to go to the Chinook Hospital for your symptoms. What was the initial response from the healthcare workers?
Initially, they were interested to know about what was happening. And one even did make a comment about, when I had mentioned that it was a vaccine injury to one of the lab techs, and she had, looked at one of her coworkers and said, yeah, like another one.
So when you say the workers were saying, oh, there's another one, what was the attitude that you sensed? Were they in a sense, kind of rolling their eyes, oh, there's another one, that this could possibly be a false or exaggerated claim, or was it different?
No, definitely. And then, prompting to talk more about it. Very interested, if anything, I would say. The healthcare workers that I have, come in contact with, and the patient care I've gotten along the way has just been fantastic as well. So, no, definitely not in a rolling eye type of way. Definitely more piquing interest. And someone could get this sick. I'm not old. I mean, I am just in my early 40s, but I mean, for someone to get this sick so fast, I think at that time it was really unheard of, and people were more interested.
And when you were in the hospital, this was like a suspected COVID-19 vaccine injury. So tell us, like, at what point was this confirmed to be a legitimate vax injury?
It was about 6 months into my 14-month diagnosis there, or not diagnosis, sorry, about 14 months into my health problems. And that's when the doctor started to suspect. Obviously, I had my suspicions as well, but we had to kind of get it down on paper to submit to VARS. It's the place where you submit your vaccine injuries. Any practitioner has to submit if he feels that, their patient has been harmed in any way from a vaccine, has to submit it. And all the paperwork was done fairly on. And then when I did get my blood work to be normal again, finally after 14 months, that's when we checked on the paperwork and submitted it for a vaccine injury program. So I'm a candidate for that. So I don't know exactly what that entails. I'm going to be finding out more in the future about what it means, but I have been accepted by the program.
A lot of us Albertans have been talking about the TV series The Last of Us, and why shouldn't we? Many of the scenes were shot right here in our province. Well, after the break, we discuss where and how one of those scenes was shot. Keep it right here.
We didn't realize how big a show it was going to be. We often have commercials and movies and documentaries shot in Waterton, and we don't think too much of it. So I didn't realize how big this show was actually going to be.
The series The Last of Us has been the talk of Alberta as the HBO series has highlighted various parts of the province. A recent episode was shot in the mountain town of Waterton, southwest of Lethbridge. I chatted with local hotel owner and Chamber of Commerce President Shamir Suleiman to find out more about the village and the plans for the tourist season. I gotta ask you about the huge HBO series, The Last of Us. So the most recent episode, I believe, was shot in Waterton, right there at the Bayshore Inn, which you own as well, right, Shamir?
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
Yeah, talk about having this episode shot in your community and in your hotel. What was it like?
When they first approached us, we didn't realize how big a show it was going to be. We often have commercials and movies and documentaries shot in Waterton, and we don't think too much of it. So I didn't realize how big this show was actually going to be. It's huge, of course, and when they came in, they took over the entire hotel. And it was really exciting to see that opening shot of Waterton in the winter, because I love Waterton in the winter. It's an amazing getaway. And to see the front of the Bayshore and how they took all the signs out, of course, put their own spin on the front of the hotel, and they used other buildings in the park. It was just exciting to see our little slice of heaven on the big screen. So it was really quite exciting. And we've had phone calls all day kind of in the hotel saying, "Oh, that was the Bayshore. We love it down there. We love Waterton," so on and so forth. So it's been really exciting for us.
That's so neat. Okay, so you're saying that they changed the signage. Did they do that in CG, or did they actually come in and do stuff physically?
No, they were there for about 3 days before.
Wow.
They actually put down fake snow, and then it snowed 1.5 feet on top of poor guys. It snowed on top of that.
Yeah,
but they
you
took
don't
all
have
of
to
our
do that
signage
there.
off.
You don't have to put down the fake snow, do you?
But they took all the signage off. They put all their own signage up. They built all those sets. They built all that, everything you see inside. They built all that. So it was quite neat to see how the movies were made and how they were able to, what we see them shoot and what the final product was. how amazing it actually was.
Yeah, that's really cool. You said that they approached you. How did they even hear about the Bayshore? Had they been there kind of location scouting already?
Yeah, I think there's location scouts kind of all over Alberta, and they shot so many other movies and TV shows that you may not know, and I may not know, because a lot of them are foreign films. So we've had 3 or 4 foreign films shot there. So location scouts know about us anyways, and if we kind of turn up, and there's nothing more perfect than an abandoned town in the middle of winter. Well, Waterton's the one.
I think a lot of people don't know about Waterton Lakes National Park. It's one of the smallest national parks, isn't it? At least in Alberta, for sure.
It is, and it's the first international peace park ever. So it's a big deal. And the one positive COVID was able to do for us is showcase Waterton to locals and to Albertans that had seen the picture but never actually ventured down. And once they did, we kind of heard, wow, what an amazing area that we have seen pictures of but never knew where it was, never heard of it, and didn't realize how amazing it was down here.
The Waterton Guide is always an interesting read. What can you tell us about the theme for the guide this year?
So this year's guide is, last year was all about we're back, we're open, rejuvenated. Now a lot of the park, almost 90%, there's just one little Crandall campground that Parks Canada we're giving them a little nudge to get that Crandall campground done. But other than that, everything's ready, everything's open, post-fire, post-COVID, everything's sort of up and ready to go. And for us, it's about rebirth, rejuvenation, and really showing off all that Waterton has to offer, all the hikes, all the bikes, all the biking, golfing. Our golf course has undergone a huge transformation with new ownership. Our stables were just rebuilt after the fire. That's brand new. So it's kind of that year where we're all ready, where everything's new, everything's ready to go. It's kind of like a rebirth would be that. And our always our focus on the side, and that leads us is how we're all family-owned and operated businesses. That's a big thing for us. My family has owned it we're on our 3rd generation. There's families that have been there for 100 years. Just like I always say, every business for us is known by the business owner. Every cabin has the family name on it. It's a very family-owned and operated atmosphere, and that's what we always play up on.
Well, some say money doesn't buy happiness, but then poverty can't buy anything. With more singles in their 40s and 50s, what are good practices when it comes to retirement and estate planning? Up next, we speak with lawyer Stephen Mogden to find out how single adults can navigate towards the next phase of their lives.